Britain wakes up to a bombshell that nobody saw coming. Tom Hardy, the man who brought us Venom, Mad Max, and became one of the most respected voices in British cinema, has just gone head-to-head with Prime Minister Keir Starmer in a confrontation that's sending shockwaves through Westminster and beyond. This isn't some celebrity tantrum or publicity stunt. This is real, this is raw, and this is about to expose everything wrong with the current state of British politics. The mainstream media tried to bury it, political insiders attempted to downplay it, but the truth has a way of clawing its way to the surface, and what Tom Hardy revealed about his encounter with Starmer will make your blood boil. We're talking about a secret meeting that was never supposed to see the light of day, conversations that were meant to stay behind closed doors, and revelations that could shake the very foundation of public trust in this government. The establishment thought they could control the narrative, thought they could keep one of Britain's biggest stars silent, but they picked the wrong man to mess with. Hardy didn't just speak out. He came out swinging with facts, with proof, and with a fury that only comes from someone who's seen the truth and refuses to look away. What you're about to discover will change everything you thought you knew about what's really happening in number 10 Downing Street. This goes deeper than politics, deeper than party lines. This is about integrity, honesty, and whether the people running this country actually care about the citizens they're supposed to serve. The clash began 3 weeks ago when Tom Hardy attended what was described as a private cultural event in London, a gathering meant to celebrate British arts and cinema. Starmer was there playing the part of the supportive Prime Minister, shaking hands and making promises about increased funding for the arts. But what happened after the cameras stopped rolling tells a completely different story. According to multiple sources who were present at the event, Hardy approached Starmer during a private moment away from the press and the carefully staged photo opportunities. The conversation started cordially enough, with Hardy thanking the Prime Minister for attending the event. But then Hardy did something that politicians absolutely hate. He asked a direct question about the government's actual plans for arts funding, not the glossy promises they parade in front of cameras, but the real numbers, the actual commitments buried in budget documents that most people never read. Starmer's response, witnessed by at least 4 people in that room, was dismissive and condescending. He essentially patted Hardy on the shoulder and told him to leave the politics to the politicians, that celebrities should stick to entertaining people and let the adults handle the serious work of governance. That was his first mistake. Tom Hardy isn't just some Hollywood actor parachuting in to feel important. He's a working class kid from East London who fought his way up through struggle and addiction to become one of the most accomplished actors of his generation. He knows what real people face because he's lived it, and he certainly doesn't appreciate being patronised by a career politician who's spent decades insulated from the harsh realities that most Britons deal with every single day. Hardy didn't back down. Instead, he pulled out his phone and started reading directly from government documents that showed the arts budget had actually been cut by 12%, despite Starmer's public claims of investment and support. He questioned why community theatres were closing, why arts programmes in schools were being slashed, and why funding for mental health initiatives connected to the arts had virtually disappeared. The room went silent. Starmer's aides immediately tried to intervene, suggesting they could schedule a proper meeting to discuss these concerns through official channels, but Hardy wasn't interested in the usual political runaround. He pressed harder, asking about the disconnect between what the government says publicly and what they actually do behind closed doors. He brought up specific examples of programmes that had lost funding, of artists who were struggling, of young people being denied opportunities because the money simply wasn't there, despite all the grand speeches about supporting British culture. Starmer's demeanour changed completely. Gone was the friendly politician routine, replaced by something much colder and more calculating. He told Hardy that if he wanted to make a real difference, he should consider how his public statements might affect future government relationships with the entertainment industry. The implication was crystal clear. This was a threat, thinly veiled but unmistakable. Play ball and stay quiet, or risk seeing even more cuts, more obstacles, more problems for the very community Hardy was trying to defend. That threat was Starmer's second mistake because Tom Hardy doesn't respond well to bullies, and he certainly doesn't fold when someone tries to intimidate him into silence. What happened next was captured on at least 2 phones belonging to people at the event, though none of that footage has been released publicly yet. Hardy stood his ground and told Starmer directly that he wouldn't be threatened, that the British people deserved honesty from their leaders, and that hiding behind political spin, while real communities suffered, was exactly the kind of behaviour that created the massive trust deficit between politicians and citizens. He said that if Starmer truly cared about the arts and culture, he would stop making promises he had no intention of keeping and would start being honest about the government's priorities. The confrontation lasted less than 10 minutes, but those 10 minutes have sent ripples through both political and entertainment circles that are still being felt today. Starmer's team went into immediate damage control mode, reaching out to attendees and strongly suggesting that what happened was a private conversation that should remain private. They painted Hardy as someone who misunderstood the complexities of government budgeting, who was emotional and perhaps not fully informed about the bigger picture. They even leaked stories to friendly media outlets suggesting that Hardy had been confrontational and inappropriate, that he had ambushed the Prime Minister at what was supposed to be a celebratory event. But here's what they didn't count on. Tom Hardy has spent years building a reputation for authenticity and straight talk, while Starmer's government has spent months hemorrhaging public trust with one broken promise after another. When it comes to credibility, Hardy has it in spades, and the public knows it. The attempted cover-up only made things worse for Starmer's team. Within days, other attendees from that event started speaking anonymously to journalists, confirming Hardy's version of events and adding even more damaging details. They described how uncomfortable the entire exchange made everyone in the room, how Starmer's mask slipped and revealed someone who seemed more concerned with controlling the narrative than addressing legitimate concerns. They talked about how Hardy remained calm and factual throughout, while Starmer became increasingly defensive and dismissive. Some even mentioned that other people at the event had wanted to speak up in support of Hardy, but felt intimidated by the presence of government officials and worried about potential professional repercussions. This is the reality of how power works in Britain today. People are afraid to speak truth to power because they've seen what happens to those who do. They've watched whistleblowers get destroyed, critics get marginalised, and dissenting voices get shut out of opportunities. The system protects itself, and anyone who threatens that system, even with legitimate questions and valid concerns, gets treated as a problem to be managed rather than a citizen to be heard. Tom Hardy refused to accept that dynamic, and that refusal is what makes this story so significant. This isn't about one actor having a disagreement with one politician. This is about whether we live in a country where powerful people can be questioned, where leaders can be held accountable, and where ordinary citizens have any real voice in how they're governed. The aftermath of the confrontation revealed something even more disturbing about how Starmer's government operates. Within 48 hours of the event, Hardy started noticing unusual activity around his upcoming projects. A film he was attached to that had been in advanced negotiations with UK Film Council funding suddenly hit unexpected delays. A charity initiative he'd been working on that involved government partnerships mysteriously stalled. Phone calls weren't being returned. Meetings got cancelled. Nothing was ever explicit. Nothing was ever said directly. But the message was unmistakable. There would be consequences for speaking out. This is how modern political intimidation works. It's not thugs showing up at your door or explicit threats that can be recorded and exposed. It's 1,000 small obstacles that appear out of nowhere, opportunities that evaporate, partnerships that dissolve, all with plausible deniability attached. When Hardy reached out to contacts in government to ask what was happening, he got sympathetic responses but no real answers. Everyone seemed nervous, everyone seemed to be looking over their shoulder, and everyone seemed to understand that something had shifted, but nobody wanted to say it out loud. The entertainment industry, which had largely stayed quiet during the initial confrontation, started whispering. People who'd worked with Hardy for years reached out privately to express support, but urged him to let it go, to move on, to stop poking the bear. They warned him that going up against a sitting Prime Minister was political suicide, that he'd lose access, lose opportunities, and potentially damage his career beyond repair. Some suggested he issue a statement walking back his comments, maybe frame it as a misunderstanding, find a way to make peace with Starmer's team before things got worse. But Tom Hardy has never been the type to back down from a fight, especially when he knows he's right. Instead of retreating, he started digging deeper. He reached out to economists, to policy experts, to people who actually understand how government budgets work and where money really goes. What he discovered was even more damning than the surface level cuts he'd confronted Starmer about. The arts funding situation was just one symptom of a much larger problem with how this government operates. Money that was supposed to go to community programs and public services was being redirected to consultants, to private contractors, to initiatives that looked good in press releases, but delivered almost nothing in terms of actual public benefit. Hardy found examples of millions of pounds being spent on feasibility studies that went nowhere, on rebranding exercises for government departments, on external communications firms hired to manage the government's image. Meanwhile, youth centres were closing, libraries were cutting hours, arts programmes that had served communities for decades were being shut down permanently. The disconnect between the government's public messaging about investment and support versus the reality of what was actually happening on the ground was staggering. And when Hardy tried to raise these issues through official channels, when he requested meetings with ministers and submitted formal inquiries about specific budget allocations, he was stonewalled. Assistants would promise to get back to him, but never did. And letters went unanswered. Freedom of information requests got delayed or returned with so much information redacted, they were essentially useless. The government that claimed to be the most transparent in British history was doing everything possible to avoid answering straightforward questions about how they were spending taxpayer money. This pattern of behaviour extended far beyond Hardy's individual experience. As word spread about what happened at the event and about Hardy's subsequent investigation into government funding, other people started coming forward with similar stories. Artists who'd questioned funding decisions and suddenly found themselves excluded from grant programmes, community organisers who'd criticised local government policies and then saw their non-profit registrations get tangled in bureaucratic red tape. Journalists who'd written unflattering pieces about Starmer's government and found their access to government sources completely cut off. A picture began emerging of an administration that talked constantly about accountability and transparency, but operated with a siege mentality where any criticism was treated as an attack and any questioner was viewed as an enemy. The machinery of government was being used not to serve the public, but to protect those in power from scrutiny. And anyone who didn't play along, anyone who insisted on asking difficult questions or demanding real answers, got pushed to the margins. Tom Hardy's celebrity status gave him a platform and a level of protection that ordinary citizens don't have, but even he was feeling the pressure. Imagine what it's like for regular people who don't have millions of social media followers, who don't have journalists eager to cover their stories, who don't have the financial resources to weather a sustained campaign of professional obstacles and bureaucratic harassment. Those are the people who get crushed by this system, the whistleblowers who lose their jobs, the activists who get exhausted fighting battles they can never win. The citizens who eventually just give up because speaking out costs too much. Hardy realised that his confrontation with Starmer had exposed something much bigger than arts funding or even government dishonesty. It had revealed a fundamental crisis in British democracy. The gap between those who hold power and those who are supposed to be served by that power has become a chasm. Politicians operate in a bubble where they control the information flow, manage the narrative, and face almost no real accountability for their decisions. They give speeches about serving the people while surrounding themselves with advisors and consultants who've never spent a day struggling to pay rent or worrying about how to afford groceries. They make promises during campaigns and then govern based on completely different priorities once they're safely in office. And when someone calls them out on the discrepancies, when someone demands honesty and accountability, the full weight of the establishment comes down on that person's head. This isn't how democracy is supposed to work. In a functional democracy, leaders are servants of the people, not rulers over them. Citizens have the right to question their government, to demand transparency, to hold officials accountable without fear of retaliation. The relationship between the governed and those who govern should be based on trust, on honest communication, on a shared commitment to the common good. But somewhere along the way, Britain lost that. The political class became a separate caste, more concerned with maintaining their position and protecting their interests than with actually serving the public. And anyone who points this out, anyone who demands better, gets labelled as difficult, unreasonable or naive about how politics really works. Tom Hardy made a decision that would change everything. Instead of backing down or trying to work within the system that was clearly designed to silence him, he went public. Not through a carefully managed press release or a sanitised interview with a friendly journalist, but through a raw, unfiltered video posted directly to his social media accounts where he could speak directly to the British people without anyone filtering or spinning his words. In that video, Hardy laid out everything that had happened since his confrontation with Starmer. He showed documents, he named names, he provided specific examples of how government money was being misspent while essential programmes were being cut. He talked about the intimidation tactics, the professional obstacles that had mysteriously appeared, the pattern of retaliation against anyone who questioned the government's actions. But more importantly, he talked about why this mattered, why every British citizen should care about what was happening regardless of their political affiliation or their opinion of him personally. This wasn't about him being a celebrity with hurt feelings. This was about a government that had stopped serving its people and had become focused entirely on protecting its own power and managing its public image. Hardy challenged his followers to start asking their own questions, to look at what their government was actually doing versus what it was claiming to do, to demand accountability from the people they'd elected to represent them. He reminded people that politicians work for us, not the other way around, and that we have every right to expect honesty, transparency, and genuine service from those we put in positions of power. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, the video had millions of views. Within days, it became the most watched political content in recent British history. People shared their own stories of government incompetence, of broken promises, of feeling completely disconnected from the political system that was supposed to represent them. The comment sections filled with accounts of communities that had been neglected, services that had been cut, programmes that had disappeared while politicians gave speeches about investment and progress. What Hardy had done was give voice to a frustration that millions of Britons had been feeling but hadn't been able to articulate or hadn't felt empowered to express. He'd used his platform not to promote himself but to shine a light on systemic problems that affected everyone. And people responded because they recognised the truth in what he was saying. They'd been experiencing the same disconnect, the same sense that something was fundamentally broken in how Britain was being governed. Starmer's team scrambled to respond but found themselves completely outmanoeuvred. Their usual tactics of spinning the narrative through friendly media outlets didn't work because Hardy had bypassed those gatekeepers entirely. They tried to discredit him by suggesting he didn't understand the complexities of governance, but that argument fell flat when people saw the level of research and documentation he'd provided. They attempted to paint him as a celebrity with an agenda, but that narrative collapsed under the weight of thousands of ordinary citizens sharing similar experiences.